haven't done this for 2 years. I'm so excited. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I kind of want to go, everyone come to the front. Let me see. Let me try and remember how to do this. Clicker and look at that thing occasionally. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this room instead of the other room. That sounds a bit boomy to me. Let me just push that down a tad. There we go. So, what I'm going to talk about today for 10 to 15 minutes, let's see how it goes. My timing is probably a little bit off as well, is what happens to smaller pay TV operators given all of the stuff that's been happening with tech and OTT streaming platforms and stuff that you already know about. So, what are the key points of today's session? This is a bit too small for me to read. I'm going to have a look up here, I think. So pay TV has traditionally revolved around a content and technology-based strategy for differentiation. So if you're a pay TV operator, you're going to be spending money on either premium content or you're going to be spending money on technology in order to differentiate your service, if that's DVR or live streaming technologies, whatever it happens to be. But technology has been becoming democratized at the same time as content has been kind of fragmented back or disaggregated back to D2C and OTT streaming platforms, so the content creators themselves. So that's what's happened in the larger context of things. And what that means is that there's a lower barrier to entry to come into the market. It doesn't cost very much to set up a streaming service right now. It's, you can put something on YouTube and you're a content creator and you have your own service, and then there's a scale up from that. So the lower barriers to entry mean that there's new competition coming into the market, and that new competition is companies like smart TV companies, streaming sticks, Rokus, things like that. And that creates a much more dynamic ecosystem. So the argument is, in that ecosystem, do smaller pay TV operators have a place, and what kind of place is that? And my argument would be that there is a place for companies that have local billing relationships, understand what the local market looks like, and have linear content from that market. So this is going to be a positive story for smaller pay TV operators. So let's have a look at what that market looks like and give us some framework. This is my view of the kind of primary aggregation stage of the market. Anyone who needs pictures of the slides, you can also ask me at the end and I'll send them to you very, very happily. But I'm flattered that you want to take pictures of them, of course. If you get me in shot, that's great as well. So primary aggregation was, let's take linear channels, let's put them all together in an easy to consume package, and then start building on top of that with VOD services, with premium sports, with first run movie rights, pay one window, all of that kind of stuff. And so we have companies that you'd recognize that are differentiating primarily around the fact that they can afford to spend money on all of the distribution technology and all of the content that allows them to differentiate in the market. What that meant is that some companies with more money were able to differentiate themselves significantly more than other companies. So we have big companies, what I would term premium rights holding companies, that spend their money on both content and technology and have traditionally been the incumbents in the market. A step down from that, you have newer entrant telcos who came in with IPTV propositions primarily, and a bunch of OTT streaming type companies in the first kind of wave or so of OTT. And those companies have traditionally focused more on the technology stuff and less on buying premium content rights. So they don't typically buy the sports rights in their local market. But I would draw your attention to what I've called lower tier providers. So we do a lot of work on segmentation of buyers, and there's a lot of reasons behind why this segmentation makes sense in terms of technology profile of spending and sophistication for certain levels of technology. But that market is about half of all of the potential companies that are buying technology, and they don't really have enough money traditionally to differentiate either their content offering or in terms of their own technology spend. So half of the market doesn't really have money to compete in a world that's differentiated by content and technology. But as I'm sure you'd be guessing, that has changed. And what's happening recently is that technology has been democratized. It's much cheaper to launch services. This is a very simplified view of it, obviously, but cloud makes everything cheaper. And if you go to cloud-based technologies like transcoding, for example, or just putting your content workflow or asset management into cloud-based services and providers, then it scales much better. You can get better levels of technology as a smaller provider for less money than you would if you were trying to do this on-prem a few years ago. So it's cheaper to do stuff in the cloud in general. It scales better to smaller companies. And then the other side of it is that all of your kind of consumer-facing stuff, your front end, your user experience, that's very much enabled by standardized operating systems, particularly Android at the low end of the market, but also RDK. And this means that you can develop a much higher level of UX, a much higher degree of sophistication in terms of things like personalization and ad insertion and how your carousel looks and feels and all of that kind of stuff. And it means that you don't have to compete on the same technology footing that you had 10 years ago. And many operators, and particularly newer build operators, have gone full in on this, but the reality is that most of that market, that 50% of buyers, they haven't really taken the step towards going onto a full cloud-based workflow, and even in some cases going to Android set-top boxes. But these together will get you to market faster with better features than if you were trying to build stuff in-house. And that's typically the case. And so as a smaller provider, this allows you to do more than you could before. And this looks almost as good as something that's a proprietary build from one of the big companies. And so you can start to compete on a technology footing. On the content side of the market, all of these companies have decided to take their content back in-house and go to market on global D2C platforms. So, Disney, Peacock, Hulu, etc. That whole trend is because that technology is cheaper, you can get to market with a pretty good proposition. So you don't have to use a pay TV operator in order to do your distribution technology. You can build it in-house, you can use the internet, etc., stuff you guys know. And that means that those guys are not necessarily, they might be pulling content off, but they're not necessarily wedded to a single platform in a particular market. That means that, premium movies, for example, or premium sports more recently, is not necessarily tied up with an incumbent single operator. It's more freely available in the market and can be reaggregated, which I believe is my next slide, into what we and many in the market are calling super aggregators, which is basically the same as aggregators, but it's using apps rather than linear channels as the primary means of aggregation, and it's dealing with all of the kind of the business logic that allows those apps to be aggregated. So things like billing, data, search, discovery, etc. So there's a load of other stuff that comes with that. It is different to aggregation. It's not pulling linear channels together onto a set-top box. It's pulling apps together into a shopping mall, a supermarket. And so that platform play is different. What's important here is the technology is available for anyone to do that because it's on Android. And it's freely available to pull that content together because they're apps. And so the market, the dynamics of this market and what means that you differentiate yourself in this market has completely changed. You can be a small operator and be a super aggregator and compete with companies that previously outspent you on content and technology. You can do it quite easily, it's quite cheap, and so that's good for a small operator. But equally, it's good for anybody who wants to do a OTT or streaming startup or make a smart TV platform or anything like that. So it brings new competitors into the market. And so the question then becomes, as a small local pay TV operator, what can I do that's different to Samsung, for example? How do I compete in that market where streaming sticks are available and smart TVs have, the same set of apps and a really good UI as well? So this is kind of our bargaining power view of the market, and don't read too much into the names of the companies on this graphic, but it always helps to put somebody on graphics. So big companies have more power, and big operators or telcos and big content rights holders, when they get into a negotiation, they are talking as equals somewhat. And so these guys can somewhat bully those guys, and those guys can somewhat bully these guys, but they're going to come to an agreement where there's some data sharing and there's some level of integration that everyone finds kind of fair. As you go down the market in terms of operators, you get less bargaining power against the bigger guys. You might still have enough power to negotiate pretty strongly with your local linear broadcasters, but Disney's not going to take a call from you. And so you do what they tell you. That means that you can't start building stuff proprietary on your own, set-top box platform, because they're not going to support you. You're going to spend tons of money in order to do something that everyone else already has. So you have to find an alternative, and the alternative is a standardized OS platform with an app store like Android TV operator tier, and that is you can do that, or you can do RDK, but there are very few other things that you should be doing at the moment as a smaller operator, because you just lose access to all of the content. So this world where content is now available to be pulled together on any platform, make sure that you have a platform that allows you to do that in a cost-effective way, and doesn't mean that you're on a 3-year development waiting list at the bottom of the pile in order to get Netflix onto your Linux box. What else should you do? And this is another good point of differentiation. Go fully into the cloud, because it scales, it's cheap, and if you think that you're going to do better and faster development than Netflix, then great, good luck. It's really hard to keep up. There are a few guys at the front of the market who are going to develop all of the paradigms of how these markets work. So there's no point in spending a lot of money on having comprehensive A/B testing on your 1,000,001 subscribers, because Netflix will work out what to do faster than you. And if you have the right multi-tenanted SaaS provider for your front-end OVP stuff, they're going to give it to you faster than your development team can. There might be features that you can develop in-house, but in the main, use technology providers that are multi-tenanted, because it's cheap and you'll get much more development budget spread out over a wide range of their customers, and split things up in a way that benefits from cloud architecture, microservices, etc., etc. So all of this stuff is kind of, again, everyone knows this, but do it. If you're not doing it, you should do it, because this is the only way to compete in terms of making it feel like you have the technology budget of a much larger company. And then the benefits of being a smaller local pay TV operator are actually pretty meaningful. As a small provider, you know your local market, you have billing relationships for many years, you often have access services and other things going into households locally, and all of those big companies that have the great content on their apps, they actually need you. So typically, most of these big OTT platforms don't really go to market directly. They're using various other services. In this graphic we're seeing, this is from Antenna, they're showing the amount of stuff that's going over billing via Amazon and Apple. This is indicative of a bigger trend. Everyone knows that Netflix has got 200 plus deals with pay TV operators. I don't know exactly what the number is right now, but these guys need local providers because they need trusted brands to carry them into market. They need trusted billing. And so you implement your DCB, you pull in lots of these brands and companies, you take a cut of it, whatever that happens to be, and they need some data sharing and everything. And that can all be done through whatever you know locally about your providers, about your consumers. Sorry, John's distracting me by telling me I'm running late. My first day back, John. So the other thing that's really important is linear content, and it's often overlooked. Linear has dropped in terms of viewing hours, and VOD has risen. Everyone knows that as well. That's important. It shows lots of demographic changes, it shows lots of behavioral changes. But there's something else going on, of course, which is there's a huge linear audience, there's a huge demographic that prefers linear, and if you pull away from that demographic, you lose them. And so, not to generalize what that demographic might be, but as a local provider, you can pull linear content in, and you can start to do something that really none of the OTT only providers or the global providers can do, which is start merging the behaviors of linear content through mixing linear with linear and linear catch-up with VOD content through good interfaces that have good data and search and unification. And that allows you to deal with a much wider demographic in your local market, and that has value. So I think there is another discussion about what a pay TV operator should be and could be. All households need internet. Many of those households don't watch as much VOD as you might think. Many of them want to watch linear TV, and so pay TV operators still sit in the market where they can provide that. And it's a long way for a lot of the OTT-only platforms to come to start aggregating all of the linear channels for every single small market. So, summary of what I just said. John, do you want me off stage, or can I go through this? Okay, quickly. Invest in the UX. Technology that's available. It's off the shelf, it's easy, it gets you a huge amount further than if you've got an old Linux box. Get your workflow into the cloud because it's cheap, it's fast, and it's going to give you all of the benefits of having a much larger dev team than you actually do, and make it feel like you're a much bigger technology spender than you actually are. Aggregate content by aggregating apps rather than trying to buy content, because buying content is incredibly expensive and has become much more expensive as everyone tries to compete on it. Focus on that customer experience, that gateway to data and billing relationships in your local market, and make sure that you don't drop linear content, because linear content is, of course, the gateway to a big chunk of the demographic audience in that market. And that is me, and this is my company. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all again.